Alright, welcome to another episode of Glen Yaps, and we're back in my recording studio, the Screaming Mosquito recording studio. Been doing a lot of music projects in the last little while, lots of recording, and I post a lot of videos on my Facebook page and stuff, and I kind of send them out to my relatives and friends. Just see what I'm basically doing, and people always send responses, and I have a music forum and a blog where I post some of them too. I'm always getting questions of how I do something or why I do something. And last little while I've been playing 60s music with just myself for my own enjoyment. But I also started a 60s band called the Peace Vibe. I wanted to do a 60s project many years ago and couldn't find anybody that was really truly interested in playing the stuff that was, because other music styles were so popular at this time. And the 60s music was had faded, had gone, done its time. But in the last few years I've been doing fill-ins on bass with one band in town, and they do a lot of 60s stuff, and there's actually a market for it. So I had this plan of this band a few years ago and a rough idea of the tunes I wanted to play. So I said, well, I'm going to try it again and see if I can find the musicians, and oddly enough it kind of worked this time. So we've been plugging away at about 60 to maybe 70 songs. And those songs a lot of them are really short, so you can put a lot more material into a set. So I've been enjoying that this last probably 3 or 4 months, and we'll be playing live soon. The question I get asked is like, what are my musical goals, and like in particular with the 60s bands, like, why are you playing 60s music when you could be doing whatever's modern out at the time? And what I used to tell my students, I used to teach music for years, drum teacher for many years, and I got that question a lot. The problem a lot of people fall into is, if you stick to one style and don't learn any other styles, you kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You kind of alienate yourself to that one style. And actors would call that typecasting. And the problem is, if that style, obviously all styles go out of style, but if it goes out of style, what are you going to do? You can still play that style over and over again with your friends and stuff, but in a live arena, you're basically stuck. If it's out of style and new styles come in and you don't want to adapt, you're basically going to be out of work. So when I was younger, my mom, she was a classical pianist and very good, very excellent piano player, and she basically influenced me musically to learn as much as you can about different styles. She also told me that when you set a musical goal, basically don't just stick to the one goal. Have a main goal, but have secondary and third ones, just in case that main one doesn't work out. But she also told me to adjust those goals as things go along, because in the music industry, things change almost daily. So like I say, I've been asked about musical goals, and what I tell my students is basically to explore all kinds of music. Like, don't just stick to country. So, I love listening to country music, and I can't listen to rock. I can't listen to that heavy stuff. I can't do this. So yes, you can, because in all kinds of music, you will find something that appeals to your ears. Now, you may not like the majority of the music, but there is always something that you will like in another style of music. And basically it's just being very open-minded. Now, when it comes to the 60s stuff, I've always been known to play more prog rock kind of material with bands I've been in the past. And you know what? I love playing that stuff. And, some audience members love that stuff, and other musicians definitely love that stuff. But it's only one little part of this music arena. So I learned a long time ago, it's like I'm going to pick different styles and I'm going to try them. And I'm not just going to try them for short little spurts. I'm going to really put my 2 cents in. That's why I'll stick with, a style for years. I still play all styles, but if it's something new, I'm going to give it a good shot. I'm going to give it, a couple of years anyways, and see what it's all about. And I've done that with, I grew up playing, the 60s stuff with my very first band. We just loved the 60s, Beatles, Monkees, and, Dave Clark 5 and that kind of thing. And then you merged into, 70s rock and 80s rock, and you tasted a little bit of it. And then as you go through the years, all those little styles affect your own playing, and then you kind of and try and find your own identification musically in the instrument you play. You don't want to sound like, Neil Peart all the time, or you don't want to sound like Ringo Starr. You want to have your own identity. And really, I think most musicians try and work that through their musical lives. But anyways, for me, my main goal when I got into the music thing, was probably like most, was to get into a great band with your buddies and work at it, get a great band sound, get doing some original material, and then go tour and explore, right? Like most bands, you want to make it famous. That was my main goal. That was the big focus. And obviously there's hundreds of thousands of musicians and bands in the world, and chances of making it are really slim. And you realize that as you take the plunge into touring. You're going to these bars and the next band's behind you, or you're playing double bands on a night, and there's just so much competition. So for me, it's like I realized after 10 years of doing that I had to adjust the goal, because there was just no, where I was located in middle of Canada, there just wasn't a market for me to do that with a band. And you're in bands that were good, and then they break up, and you keep going, break up again, try another thing, and it just wasn't working. So you get a little frustrated. So then you adjust your goal, or you change your goal. So I basically had a totally different change. I decided that I wouldn't do a band thing. I would basically try and just myself hire myself out to other projects, like whether it be recording or whatever. So then I had this dream of being a studio musician. So to be a studio musician, you have to learn all these different styles. So that's what I started doing. That's what I started telling my students too, because I would teach in between touring and stuff. And so if you get those styles, and you do this style, and you do blues, and you do country rock, and you do jazz, if somebody calls you on the phone to do some recording, you can at least cover most styles, eh? And even that is, I'm not going to say I've mastered these styles by any means, but you can get to the point where you can at least, You know, if someone called and said, can you do this, and I need a blues shuffle and I need this kind of feel, and you can adjust to it because you've played to it and you can try your best, and if that person likes it, it's fine. Because I've been in situations where it's like, you know, you try it and the guy goes, you know, that's great, but, you know, can you change this part? And you adjust with them. I've had a few where they say, no, that's not what we want, but thank you very much, and then you move along. You know, you can't nail everything. There's some drummers in the world that are great at doing that, like Dave Wackel, Kenny Arnoff, but I mean those are pro guys. But up where I am, you know, you're limited. And I didn't want to relocate to another city. The internet makes it a lot easier to do some drum recording and sending it via the internet to that person and back and forth. You don't even have to leave the house these days, which is fantastic because it's just exactly what I would like to do. Same old basement recording studio and do other people's tracks. So anyways, so my goals had shifted at that time. No longer did I want to do the band thing. And you know what? Well, I've known a lot of musicians have gone through the same thing. And then it comes back to, okay, I'm still doing all these recording projects for other people, and I get to do my own thing. So when I decided to do the 60s band thing, it was more of a, well, first is obviously a labor of love because I love that music, but also in my city, which is Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, there's not a market that, or at the time there wasn't a market for that style of music, and there are a lot of people who love that music, but there was no bar scene for it, eh? So there's a couple of bands, trying to think here, bands like Midway and Dorian Gray and Route 66. They were bands that kind of like tapped into that a little bit and found the market. It's an older crowd, but it was just something that interested me. You know, it's like, well, here we got the heavy rock covered, we got the country covered, we got, you know, the indie Canadian music covered by a certain bar, and excuse me. But there was no 60s stuff, and these guys, you know, they grew up with it. They're older musicians in these bands that I mentioned, and they kind of sparked it back up again. So I'm going to tap into that myself. So after listening to all these bands and even filling in for a few, I decided to start my own 60s band, and or I should say, or what would we say, revisit that idea that I had from years and years ago, where I had gotten no interest, and try it again, and but focus on the more obscure 60s music, you know, music that was maybe they weren't a number one hit, but they were, you know, maybe a garage type band like the Blues Magoos, or something really different like the Association, and you know, bands like the Zombies that wrote some really cool material. So we started learning all this kind of stuff, and it actually is sounding pretty good. I mean, we'll be ready probably in a few months or less. We're almost there now. But yeah, so the question I'm asked is why I did the 60s thing. That's basically it. It's a labor of love, but also I want to see some other faces out in the bars. You know, it's like there's a pocket age group that are kind of left. You know, they like to go out, but there's nothing for them. You know, you're not going to send them to a heavy metal bar when they're in their 50s or their 60s. I mean, sure, some would like that stuff, but, and the same with the country. Not everybody likes the country thing, but, you know, they want to tap into something that they grew up with. So that's basically what I've done. But with all my students, it's like you have to learn all these different styles, and playing the 60s stuff for me, when I was a kid it was fun to play, but I didn't quite understand the technique part. And a lot of, you know, you get these snobs that'll go, oh, that stuff's all easy to play. And it's like, you know what, I went back to it after, you know, I've been playing 36 years, and I went back to it just recently playing, and you know what, there's a lot of stuff in there that's really tricky. Like One of the tough beats that I relearned was one by the band Blues Magoos. They do a song called Ain't Got Nothing Yet. I believe that's the title. Very weird drum beat. Very interesting. Based on a fast blues shuffle, but not normal even for the 60s. It's very unique. So I don't know the drummer's name of that, but so it was a challenge. Like, I really had to think about it to learn it, and I've got the videos online of me actually working out the tune. But one thing about the 60s is their harmony vocals. I find a lot of vocals nowadays stagnant. They sound all the same. It's like they're all processed through the computer, and it's horrible. But back then, they were, garage band singers, some better singers, some pro singers, but the harmonies that went with them, they might have been influenced by the Beatles, because the Beatles were very unique in that matter, but they really were different than any other decade, because you can go to the 50s doo-wop, and they're very uniform, like chords, very tight chords, which is fantastic too. But the 60s, a lot of this call and answer thing, but still with harmony vocals, and you just don't hear that kind of harmony anymore. And if you think it's easy, yeah, try working out some of the Beatles harmonies. Not easy. There was definitely a lot of talent within those bands to work on this type of vocal harmony. Now, in all fairness, some of those bands, they were average musicians. We might be a better breed of musician nowadays. That's up for debate, but at the time they were just learning their instruments. Some of these bands are like 17 to 20 years old for the average player in the band. But what they lacked in their musicianship, they worked on in their vocals and their vocal harmonies, where they might be able to just play the basic styles of chords, but vocal-wise, they really thought differently to make up for maybe the lack of their musicianship. That's just a guess, but when you hear a lot of the stuff for the harmonies, it's like, wow, very, very cool. And the other thing that's really neat is there's a younger generation that is feeding into this 60s music, because the 60s music, whether you want to believe it or not, affected many decades after. Like, it affected music, till to this day, really. You can go up from the Beatles influencing bands like Oasis and things like that, and it's amazing. So there's something special about that music, and not everybody likes it, but it's definitely influenced a lot of musicians. And the kids nowadays are actually feeding into that 60s music, which is fantastic. So anyways, for the goals and for your practicing, always practice different styles. Always listen to different styles. It's the best thing you can do, because then when you get into your older age like me, it's like, well, I can go, well, I don't want to start a 70s band, I don't want to start a 60s band, or I can start a new band and doing all the new rock or new metal or pop rock. As for the rap thing, a lot of those drum beats that you hear in a lot of the rap and hip hop stuff, they've sampled a lot of 60s music, whether it be James Brown, or even Beatles. They take little snippets. So something in the hip hop and the rap is being, triggered by this 60s stuff, which is fantastic. So just go backwards. It's like, it's like an old movie. You go revisit it and find out all the good stuff about it. There was a lot of bad too, but most of the time now you just hear the hits of the 60s anyways. It's hard to find a lot of those 60s albums, but you can listen to a lot of that stuff and get a new inspiration for the musical instrument you play. Anyway, so watch for my band, The Peace Vibe, coming probably in a few months or less. And we'll be doing a lot of 60s stuff and just having fun with it. And as for the different styles, if you just want to stick with your own style, there's nothing wrong with that. But just, as a musician, try not to just limit your focus to the one thing. You become a better musician, if you absorb other styles. All right, that's it for me. Bye for now.